Hello and welcome back to the Social Matters podcast. We are three social workers talking about social matters. My name's Fran.
Hi, I'm Nadia.
Hi, and I'm Eugene.
New season, new series.
Season
Seven.
Is it 7?
7.
Yeah. We always joke about the time, and I think the end of season 1 or 2, and we're like, is this enough now? Have we spoken about everything? And it's like, well, I think we've still got loads to talk about.
You know what? I'm going to do a test and go back to the first episode of every season and see how many times we say
that.
We're like, we're still here.
Yeah, oh my God, we couldn't talk about anything. And now we're still 100 episodes in. Oh,
But is it as important? Is it good content, or are we just still talking about stuff 7 seasons on?
I hope so.
I'll check the stats later.
Yeah. Let us know.
Check the stats. So we've had a little bit of a break, as we always do. So what's been happening in the last 3 or 4 months in your worlds, our worlds?
A lot, it seems. But also, I can't really remember. It seems like a really long time.
I just said to you, how was your weekend, Daz? You went, I can't remember.
Exactly. How am I going to remember? 3-4 months. Don't know. It's been going well.
It's been going well. But because time has gone so quickly, I forget we've had a change of government. Yeah, remember that's happened in the wider political context. But for us, there's been change because we've gone full-time social matters, diversity and inclusion.
Come on.
Equity, belonging, I forgot about our title, training consultancy, which is really exciting because I don't know how much listeners know, but we've been doing it on the side alongside full-time jobs and work, but we've got to a position where we can do it full-time, which feels really exciting and helps me think about, or makes me think about that tagline that we share between ourselves, social matters to the world, that idea of really taking these diversity, equity, inclusion and belonging ideas to everyone in true social matters style, which is fun, informative. I wanted to say free, but what else?
Fun, informative and free, did you say?
No, I wanted to say free.
Oh, okay.
Fun, informative and dynamic.
Hey.
Really
we need to get better at our marketing and strapline, don't we?
We really do. We really do. But I think it's very helpful reminders about these big things that have been happening. Thank you. But I've really been loving it so far, us going full time. It's been such a joy, and it's been so good to just spend more time with you guys and go to really different spaces that we wouldn't necessarily have thought that we would go into those spaces when we first started, but we're having really good conversations with lots of different types of people, taking ideas of social justice to those spaces. So loving it.
So good, isn't it? I wonder if it's because we are having that much fun and it is going so well, because it's actually only been 3 or 4 weeks, but it feels like so much longer that we've been sort of full time. And I was speaking to my mum the other day. I think I shared it with you too. She's always been a supporter of social matters.
Mary, we love
and she's like, how's it going? And she's like, what a lovely thing to do to share that message of belonging to the world. And I was like, yeah, mum. So important work, but it's going well, isn't it?
Yeah, really well.
So, without further ado, today's conversation and topic. So, we are having this conversation just shortly after the end of National Inclusion Week, which is very kind of fitting with the work that we do. So we thought we'd have a conversation about that more broadly. So thinking about inclusion, what it means to us, and the importance and challenges of inclusion, but really what people can do to be more inclusive. It's always good to ground us in the conversation topic. So what does inclusion mean to us?
It's an interesting term, inclusion. I would say it's an interesting term, but it is because I feel, for me, it's a term along with diversity, equity, and belonging that gets bandied around, but I feel it means something different to different people. And I guess for me, and I give credit to Arthur Chan, who talks about this on LinkedIn. But inclusion, the idea of inclusion being an action is probably what I connect with the most. And that idea that it's not passive, you have to be proactive, and the work of inclusion is ongoing. So what are you doing in a practical sense to create an environment where people feel included? What I think happens sometimes with organizations or people or groups, we talk about inclusion, but people don't really know what it means or how to create that inclusive environment on an ongoing basis. So when I talk about inclusion being in action, I think in everyday interactions on a grand scale, on a micro scale? What are you doing in your interpersonal, in your teams, in a group setting, in an environment that helps people feel more included within a particular workplace or groups? And we spoke about belonging before, and that idea of belonging being the outcome of inclusion. So for me, inclusion is an action, and belonging is the outcome.
Lovely. Do you know what I was thinking? I was thinking when you asked that question of like the action, like you just saying is inclusion, but you know, I was thinking, is it a thing of like inclusion is like anything goes, like anyone can come and be and do, and actually is there something about, there's almost sort of not rules, but like a bit of kind of like a maybe rules of, you know, actually, yes, we want you to come here and, you know, feel included, but is it a thing that anything goes? So if somebody's like, oh, you know, I'm a swearer or whatever, so I'm just gonna swear, and that really offends somebody else, then how do you kind of work out what are the rules or the kind of, I can't think of another word, like agreements or something. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was just thinking, just a thought popped into my head. How do you kind of agree how people are included?
Yeah. I think that can sometimes be some of the pushback or the challenges or the barriers, because I guess at its broadest sense, for me, inclusion is, you know, accepting difference, diversity, you know, regardless of different social graces that we often talk about on here. So sexual orientation, gender, race, ethnicity, and having a seat at the table. But then, as you said, if it's kind of tolerating the intolerant, like, you know, how that's a kind of dilemma. But I think in order to have that inclusion, it is about acknowledging and recognizing that, you know, things aren't equal and people don't have equal access to different things. So how can we ensure people voices are heard and they have that seat at the table? And when we're thinking about the topic of today, I was thinking about when I first when it came into my consciousness, the term inclusion, and I think it was almost in the context of education. And my mum and dad were teachers, and I think there was that, you know, a move to more inclusive education. So often it was kind of maybe separate in terms of special educational needs, as it was often spoken about, and actually having more inclusive schools. So that was when it first came into my consciousness, and actually not having that separation, but thinking about how can we ensure everybody has, you know, access to opportunity in that space. So that was one of the first times I heard of it, and I guess extending that to the workplace, it is thinking about how people can have that kind of feeling of acceptance and belonging, regardless of difference and diversity in those different spaces. But yeah, it was interesting when I thought about where I first heard of it as well.
That is interesting. Just as you were speaking, Fran, I was thinking, when did I first hear about it? I literally can't pinpoint. But I do definitely connect with that idea of trying to create an environment where people do feel included, and just thinking about the workplace. And one of the things that was coming to me as you were speaking was that need for it to be an ongoing process, because thinking about back to when we were teenagers or in primary school, secondary school, the notion of inclusion, I believe, looked very different to now. I think society is way more educated. We've got more access to information to understand and connect with the diversity of people. So with that knowledge, more has to be done to create this inclusive environment, and where people can be all of them themselves. And I think a starting position for me is understanding that the way that society has been built is to exclude, is not to include. Like thinking about the patriarchy, thinking about a heteronormative society, thinking about how the kind of foundations of this country historically, think about colonialism, has been built on white supremacist ideas. And that's not to say this is where we are now, like that's all in the foreground, but the essence, the grains, the seeds of society has been built on those ideals. So it will show up in a conscious or unconscious way in different kind of structures. So if our starting position is that society has been built to exclude, then that means the work that we have to do to make it inclusive has to be so much more. And you sent something around yesterday in a WhatsApp group about Kimi Badgenot's idea around maternity pay, which is another example of the kind of foundations of society being discriminatory and to exclude women from the workplace, and that's showing up in
And I think part of it to be more inclusive, as you said, is thinking about, I guess it's decentering oneself from the position. And I think in a lot of the time, and I think a lot of the time, it's decentering whiteness. I think in the workplace and a lot of spaces. And that can come at a cost for people. And I think that is when you see this sort of pushback. Because we were speaking at a conference last week, and it was about kind of Gen Z in the workplace. And I remember the young person, I sound like an older, but I remember she said a really, powerful point, and I've thought about it before, around kind of inclusion around events or social events. And actually, a lot of it is kind of probably a white male middle class view of kind of an event that might be like, we go to the pub and that's what we do. And actually to be more inclusive involves suspending that is the only option and going, do you know what? Not everybody drinks. Not everybody might want to go to the pub. People might have different caring or childcare responsibilities. But that's when I think we can sometimes see that pushback, because it's like, but this is the only way. And it's actually not. And I think that's resonated with me before. I remember when we've worked in a place before and we're having some sort of away day, and when you sort of throw ideas in the mix, and often the pub is, it's like, we'll go to the pub. And we put everything in there and people are like, oh, I'd like to go for a walk. Someone's like, I don't fucking like walking. It's a really helpful way to go, like, we all have different likes and dislikes. And I remember that stood out for me. And we came to something that was, as inclusive as we could be to everyone's needs. But I'll never forget that, because everybody has that view. And that's almost a good way to think about that diversity. Like, not everybody likes going to the pub. Not everybody likes nature. Not everybody likes a walk. And then in the end, we all just went on our own separate away date now. But I think that's a good example, isn't it? Of like how you decenter it, that this is the way to do stuff.
While you were talking, it was making me think about space, like how much space is created. And I think that is, so key in terms of like decentering like one view or one position and creating space so that everybody has room, so it doesn't feel so kind of like restricted. And I think as well, that's what also brings complexity, exactly as you described. Like, it's almost easier just to kind of center one view and just go, okay, this is what we're doing. But when you kind of widen it out and open it out so that there is people have the opportunity to be more included, that brings so much complexity, which I think maybe the initial sort of reaction is to kind of shy away or hide from that complexity and be like, oh no, it's too, but actually that's the beauty of humanity and the beauty of kind of difference, that creating that space and inviting other people's views and opportunity as well that comes to try something different. You might have the narrative you hate walking, but you might really, really enjoy it that time. And so I do think that to not shy away from the complexity, because it just brings so much richness and so much diversity.
Love that. And it's like embracing it with an open heart because of that like opportunity. I think I've probably shared it with you before, but that example when I was doing my systemic studies, and at the end we all brought in a dish from our kind of country country of origin. No, but I do think that's a lovely way, because if it was just me, we'd all be eating ham and cheese sandwiches. But my God, like, I had such a beautiful array of food, and that's an example of people bringing that difference and that openness to kind of a more inclusive lunch.
Can you give the example of how that person at that lunch through their action tried to create a more inclusive environment with you and your ham sandwich?
Yeah, okay. So basically, we had this lunch and everybody brought lunch from their kind of childhood or kind of country of origin. So people were bringing dishes from all over the world. And I brought a ham and cheese sandwich in an old ice cream tub, kind of, or massive margarine tub, because there's this picture of me and my 4 siblings on a bench in London in the 80s, like eating our little sandwiches. So I had the story of that, and I also had the kind of photograph of the 4 of us. And it was beautiful dishes, and I was like, it's okay, you don't need to eat my sandwich. And my friend Sarah from Ghana like had all these beautiful salads and dishes from around the world, and then she just put the ham and cheese sandwich on the top. And I could see she was like, I don't want Fran to not feel included with her sandwich, but I was like, babe, you don't have to eat it. It was more the meaning and symbolism. So yeah, thanks, Sarah.
Great
love it. So when you think in terms of some of the kind of organisations that we've worked with, what would you say are kind of some of the challenges that, or, some of the difficulties that we've heard kind of organisations speak about when it comes to inclusion?
I think, sort of touching on it before, it is hard work, okay? So it is that sort of, if I decenter my way of being, it can feel uncomfortable. It can feel quite discombobulating, because you're like, what? Not everybody likes going to the pub, or, I need to think beyond my own nose or lens. So I think there's something about that it requires effort, and that can put people off.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we also come across that sort of whataboutery, where it's sort of like, well, okay, if we're thinking about that group, what about me? Or what am I losing to give a piece of my pie?
Yeah.
So I think sometimes that can be that sort of common pushback, or which we commonly hear in the kind of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging world, is just the sort of it takes time, and therefore it kind of feels too hard to work. So it might be a bit of a tick box.
Yeah.
But actually, it's not embedded, as you were saying at the beginning. Inclusion needs that action. It's not. It's not done in any sort of longer term, meaningful way.
Yeah, and to build on that, I think momentum is a challenge. So how do people kind of gain momentum and then continue that to reach that objective of it being a long-term action with regards to creating a more inclusive environment? And I feel the focus on Inclusion Week kind of speaks to that a bit, because when we have weeks, or like it's Black History Month now, when we have months or days, it's almost like things are amplified, rightly so, because the spotlight needs to be shone. But that spotlight almost needs to be an ignition. So let's start the car, but let's continue to put our foot on the accelerator to keep that car going. But I think the challenge for a lot of organizations, because of competing demands and ideas of what success is or what is important to the organizations, a lot of organizations may turn the ignition to inclusion, to diversity work, but then at the end of a week, or at the end of a month, or the end of a particular period, they just turn the car off and leave it idle on the side of the motorway. So how can you keep that your foot on the accelerator, and even if the car's moving at 5 mile an hour, 10 mile an hour, just that idea of keeping it going. So it doesn't always have to be up here all the time. Where is it visible in a micro way, not always in a macro way? And I think the journey for inclusion in an ideal world for organizations, it's not going to be like this all the way up. It's going to be up, down. But thinking about it being an action and an ongoing action is really, really important. So a question to ask is, what are we doing in a active way to create a more inclusive environment? That's almost like a standard agenda item at your respective team meetings, wherever you are in the organization hierarchy. I think if that's a standing item, then that's how you keep your foot on the accelerator.
Yeah, I think because we've worked with lots of organisations that are in different places, like compared to each other in terms of the diversity and inclusion journey, I think, some are much more further along than others. And I think those that are sort of more at the start of their journey, I think a potential kind of, difficulty or challenge for them is actually starting the conversation. I think people worry about getting it wrong, or saying the wrong thing, or doing the wrong thing, and that just freezes you, that stagnates you. There isn't kind of opportunity then for growth or development if you're just, I don't want to say the wrong thing, so I'm just not going to say anything. And I think that being able to kind of start the conversation and at least sort of very respectfully and carefully inviting people to start, I think that's something that we kind of are able to sort of model and bring, that let's have the conversation, let's at least start it, and then people are like, oh, okay, maybe this isn't such a difficult conversation to have. So I think when you kind of language it of difficult conversations or whatever, it almost sets it up. Yeah, it's going to be difficult, it's going to go wrong, it's going to do more damage than be helpful. But I do think that there is a kind of we always kind of talk about leaning into that discomfort and really kind of sitting with it, because that's where the stretch and the growth happens, when you kind of go there. And I think that's what I'd say. Maybe some organisations that we've worked with are a bit more sort of tentative about actually starting the conversations about inclusion. But
and it's also, but when they do, like, I just emphasizing that, like, when they do, and when we've kind of helped organizations to do that, have that conversation, what I see is that people are almost, they've opened a new door to their understanding or to their beliefs. Fear is kind of like, from being a really big intimidating figure, is kind of reduced, and then when fear is reduced, there's more space for other ideas and thinking about how in their respective organizations they can contribute to creating this inclusion. So I really do think that idea of people being fearful, wanting to make change but being scared of it, is something that we've noticed in our work, and helping people to move away from the kind of fear perspective and really connect with the idea of how possible it is to kind of create inclusive environments is so powerful and lovely to see.
So I think it's sort of moving, isn't it, from that fear zone into the kind of learning and growth, and being open to the benefits of inclusion. And it is about, we speak a lot about it in our work, the business case for it, and it's in everyone's interest. And I think sometimes there is maybe a bit of historical rhetoric of it being like, oh, it's just for people of diverse, kind of identity, or it doesn't impact me, or, other kind of maybe negative things around wokeism. But actually, it's, the business case is so strong for the benefits of having diversity of thought and thinking, and the richness in terms of what that can bring. But I think, in order to get to that, it is being brave, as you said, leaning into that discomfort, having that growth mindset, because it is massive benefit. Thanks both. Interesting conversation, and I guess, thinking about things that organisations can do to be more inclusive. But just wanted to kind of round up the conversation, sharing some of the 4 fundamentals of diversity, equity, and I suppose in terms of today's topic, inclusion work, by Arthur Cham. And we very much support his work. And he said the 4 fundamentals are history, so really understanding the historical context and systemic issues that have contributed to current inequities. I think that's so important, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then humanity, so treat everyone with respect, dignity and compassion. We talk a lot about the importance of compassion in our work. Value the unique experiences and perspectives of others. Acknowledge multiple truths exist. So again, we spoke about that sort of decentering, like one view. Honesty. Be truthful and transparent about our own biases and shortcomings. Hold ourselves accountable and take steps to do better. And then the 4th one is humility. Recognise that we don't have all the answers and that there's always more to learn. Decenter ourselves. Remain humble and curious. Ask for and be receptive to feedback. So history, humanity, honesty and humility. So just to invite your reflections on those.
Love that.
Yeah, I really love that. I think that idea of, I think thinking about our own ideas in relation to inclusion, that introspection. So our ideas of inclusion based on our life experiences or our experiences of inclusive environments will shape the lens in which we see the world, and then we'll take that into the workplace. And that may mean that we have a narrow perspective of inclusion or broad perspective of inclusion. But I love all of those points around humility, humanity, history. We talked about like the seeds of society being built on ideas of exclusion. So I think that level of awareness of those 4 fundamental factors should kind of frame how we enter work to create more inclusive environments. But knowing that it has to be worked at, and individuals have those elements of like humility, of humanity. So bringing that into the workplace is a thing that everyone can do and do with relative ease. And if that's the first steps that you take in order to create more inclusive environments, then that is doing something. It's just about keeping that momentum. So yeah, really love that.
Yeah, I was really thinking about that history one, and I think that's so underrated. Like, do we understand the history, because it provides so much context So even when we're going into organisations, what's the history of the organisation? Like, what's come before? Like, how have we arrived here today? Because you can then sort of see how you've arrived, and just having a bit of a moment to sort of look back, what have been the different turns in events, like thinking about our kind of systemic ideas of how meaning is created in terms of like the serpentine model, like what's come before, what's come next, how have we now arrived where we are. Is so important, because to just go straight in isn't necessarily damaging, but it's, well, potentially it could be. I just think it's just super helpful to have that history. That's for like thinking about entering into an organization, but just in terms of like society as well, having history and really kind of knowing the history of yourself, of your people, of your context is so powerful. It's so powerful. So yeah, I think the history is one that shouldn't be sort of sidelined. I think, how have we arrived here today is something to think about. And then also, love humility, love the honesty, one as well, and humanity as well. So yeah, really great model. I think it just captures so much.
Yeah, definitely. One thing, and we have spoken about it in this episode, that really stood out is that there's no single truth. And I think, again, with that systemic idea of social constructionism, so, meaning created through language and interaction is so powerful. And I think when you are invited to think that way, it can feel quite like, so there's more than, what I thought, or the lens, but it's so enriching to kind of suspend that idea and think of there not being one single truth. It can just open up so much opportunity and diversity of thought. In reading that about the model, someone had written as a comment about adding a fifth of hope. And I just thought that was so nice as well, because again, it's kind of holding the hope for things being different, for things being better in the future as well. So yeah, we will share the model as well.
Yes.
But yeah, really kind of love that work as well.
Yeah.
So thanks, team. Rich discussion as always, and lots of food for thought. We invite your contributions to carry on the conversation. So we are Social Matters, and we've had a really great conversation today talking about the importance of inclusion more broadly in the life, but also in the workplace as well. If you do want to hear more, get involved, work with us, check out our website, www.socialmatters.org.uk. You can email us, info@socialmatters.org.uk. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.